Awesome. Mark is wondering about connecting to a database. Jorge is asking how to connect to other apps. I'll walk you through that as well. Deb has some questions about the differences in settings across boards and dashboards. I can walk you through that as well. If any of you, Deb, it sounds to me like you have a specific question that that you came to the webinar with, just so that it doesn't get lost in the chat. If you could put that in the Q&A section, that would be amazing. So in the chat box, there should be a little Q&A box, and you can use that to put any questions. Thanks a lot, Deb. Lior wants to just understand the platform overall and if it's something that their team should develop on top of. Awesome. Cool. I think that's, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I will focus on some of those connections and integration pieces because it sounds to me like that's an interest for many of you. If any of you have other thoughts or specific topics you want me to cover, go ahead and put it in the chat and I'll take a look. Other than that, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So those of you who are, actually before that, let me talk about an agenda. So overall, my presentation is gonna focus on a few things. First off, the why. Why should you develop apps? Why should you develop Monday apps for the marketplace or for your own team if you're building internal tools? After that, I'm gonna go through a couple of features in our platform, walk you through how they work to an end user, and then how you would build them if you wanted to build them as an app. I'll then talk a little bit about integrations and automations, which is that server-to-server communication that you can implement through the apps framework. That's going to be really helpful for those of you who are trying to connect to external apps, connect to other databases, and so on. I'll then quickly just touch on all the tools in our apps framework. I have a couple of slides which just enumerate every single section of our apps framework so that you know what's out there. And then we'll break for questions. I want to talk for about 25, 30 minutes, so about halfway. And then after that, we'll spend the rest of the time for questions. So if you have any questions right now, or if you have questions during the conversation, go ahead and put it in the Q&A section. And after we get through the meat and potatoes of the webinar, we will go through those questions one by one. Alrighty, let's go ahead and get started. So as with any webinar, before I get started, I want to show you what resources you have at your disposal if you have any questions. The first is something that I mentioned earlier, our builders community. You can access that by going to community.monday.com. And it is a great resource to connect with other developers if you have specific questions about our apps framework or APIs, or even general questions about monday.com. And our team is also checking the community and we respond to folks as well. Just a little bit of a heads up right now, every single post in the community in the last month has been answered by somebody in the community. So we do have a lot of back and forth going on. And our team, our staff team, also looks to give you a 48-hour response time. So if you post in the community, you'll definitely get someone responding, and our staff will also take a look and answer if someone hasn't already answered, of course. We also then, of course, have our apps documentation. You can access that from the web by going to monday.com and hitting the apps button right at the bottom. Or if you're already in your Monday account, I'll show you how to get there from inside your account so you don't have to worry about navigating home pages. The third resource is oftentimes, I think, underestimated by builders because you really just dive into the APIs. But do check out our help center. Monday.com is a platform that has grown. So I've been here for 2 years, and we have so many new features now, and features that you can leverage in your apps. So go ahead into the help center at support.monday.com to understand how those features work. We also have a ton of guides and specific use case guides for our users. You can use those to also understand how our users are using the platform. And you can adapt your app based on specific use cases. And finally, our webinar recording. We have a longer webinar recording that you can access via the community as well as dev post, but we'll also send you the recording of this particular session in a few days. All right, so let's talk a little bit about monday.com in general. So monday.com is a work OS. What we want you to be able to do is supercharge your team to make sure that you can get work done. We really built our platform to be as flexible as possible. And so we allow you to take these building blocks, which I'll go into in a little bit, building blocks like tables, like visualizations, like reports, like integrations, and pull them into a workflow so you can shape it in seconds and get work done from anywhere. The amazing thing about the Monday Apps framework is until, like before the apps framework was developed, we would have to develop all of these building blocks ourselves, we being the monday.com team. Now with the apps framework, you as developers can build new building blocks. So a lot of these that I'm showing right here, tables, integrations, forms, timelines, reports, dashboards, now you can build your own custom ones, either for your own team or for our marketplace and for kind of every team that's using monday.com. I want to talk a little bit about our company as well, for those of you who are new to us. So we're a startup that has raised $234 million in capital. We were launched in 2014. Right now, we have over 500 employees across 6 branches. 100,000 teams use monday.com to organize themselves. This includes Walmart, Adobe, General Electric, and 99,997 others. And right now we are at an annual recurring revenue of $150 million. We're really proud of that number. And as we're getting more and more users, that number is growing as well. So why build Monday apps? From the comments, it sounds to me like there's a mix of folks who want to build public apps and private apps. These are the 2 species of apps that, or the way that we think about it. Public apps are apps that are featured in our apps marketplace to reach all of our monday.com users. Really the reason to build public apps is a couple of different things. So first off, we are a growing tool. As you can see, we already reach 100,000 teams, and that number is growing every single day. If you want first mover advantage, you want to come in and be the first app in your vertical or domain to access our user base, now's the time to do it. Build an app, be featured in our marketplace, and get going. It also lets you set the standard for your industry. If you've got folks who are, if you've got other competitors who are building apps for other platforms, and you have a lot of shared users with monday.com, go ahead and build an app for us so that you can say, hey, all of my competitors, this is how we differentiate. And of course, if you have shared clients with us, then you'll want to build an app to integrate your product with monday.com so they can use both. Now moving on to private apps. A few of you wanted to build specific apps for your teams. And really that's where private apps come in. You can use it to build internal tools for your team who's already using monday.com and really customize it for your particular workflows and needs. I've seen a few really cool app ideas where really it's built off of a very specific industry focused use case, and the app is built just all around that particular use case. And if you are part of our partners network, you can also use Monday apps to develop solutions for your customers. So I know that there was someone in the chat who mentioned that they develop apps on G Suite. And if you wanted to build on monday.com and expose those apps to your users as professional services, you could do that as well. All right, a few more opportunities that I want to quickly touch on. The Monday Apps Challenge is where you can submit your app to a couple of different categories and win. I'm sure a lot of you have already heard of this, and it's why you're here. So I'm not going to touch too much on this, but of course, the grand prize is a Tesla, which is pretty amazing. We also have a builders workshop later in August. We're still tying down the exact dates, but that application will be posted on DevPost, which is where our Apps Challenge is hosted. So if you register for our Apps Challenge, you'll be able to apply for our builders workshop, you'll get a notification when that goes live. And finally, we have weekly webinars. Today, you're joining the second one of 6. And we're going to keep having these. We're going to keep having Q&As. So if you want to join another one in the next couple of weeks, you can definitely do that. All of the sessions timings are also on DevPost, which is where our apps challenge is. And I'll show you all of that in a little bit. All right, we're not going to do this. We're not going to fill out the form. I'm instead going to start talking about what a Monday app is in general. So far, we've talked about what you can do with, why you should build one, but now I'm going to talk to you about what you can do with one. So in general, a Monday app is a bundle of functionality inside the monday.com work OS. Apps can contain multiple features, quote unquote features. That's what they're called in the platform. And the way that you should think about them is building blocks. I mentioned earlier that you can use all of these different building blocks to construct a workflow, and your app can contain one of these building blocks or multiple building blocks to build a unified set of functionality. We do have a software development kit as well as an apps framework to make it as easy as possible. I'll show you a couple of ways that our apps framework makes it really easy for you to build apps on top of our platform, so you don't have to really worry too much about hosting, about setting up configuration and all of that. We handle most of that. There are 3 different kinds of features. One is a board view. It's a client-side web app that's connected to a single monday.com table or board. And I'll show you what that means in a little bit. You can also create a client-side application that connects to multiple boards. We call this a widget, and this is going to be part of a larger dashboard that your users can use to pull in data from multiple sources. And finally, you can also create a server-to-server integration recipe. With integrations, your users will configure the recipe. So the trigger and the action when a new item is created, do something in my CRM. And then what you do is build your server logic so that when that thing happens in your CRM, you ping monday.com or vice versa. If something happens in monday.com, we ping your server and then your server does something. I'll walk you through in more details what that looks like in a bit. All right, so I'm gonna switch tacks a little bit right now and open up our platform. Just as a quick check, can you still see my screen? Can you see Google Drive? And I'm gonna switch over to Monday. Yes, okay, perfect. Deb, I see that we may see you every week. That's awesome. We're gonna host these every week, and even if the webinar has 1 person on it, I'm still gonna do it. So come through. Any of you have other questions that come up in the next week, join my next one. It's at 11 p.m. New York time next Wednesday, I think. All right, so let's talk a little bit about monday.com, the UI. If you're not familiar, this is what it looks like when you open up monday.com. You've got an inbox which shows your users, which shows the particular logged in user, all of the recent communication in their account. On the left side, you have a list of all of the boards that your account has. So in this case, I'm going to open up this particular board. It is called Puppy Event Attendees. And it is a board for keeping track of the attendees who came to a specific puppy party. So we just had a bunch of dogs coming together and playing around, and their owners could connect and chill out. As you can see, boards are set up like tables. You have individual line items or records, and then you have customizable columns which hold various pieces of data. Each of these columns, the email, phone, name, breed, these all have different column types. And what this means is users can interact with them in a slightly different way. In this case, it's someone's email address. And so you can add someone's email and some like preview text. I've also got a phone column where you can put in a phone number, and it'll give you the country flag. And we've got some text columns, and we've also got like a status column right here, which is a little drop down that lets you select a status. We have a ton of other columns as well. If you click on the plus, you can see all of them by hitting more columns. And really the reason I want to bring this up to you is that our columns all have different data structures, and every time you want to do anything via our APIs or our apps framework, keep that in mind. make sure that whatever app you're building understands and has logic to parse the various different data structures, and that you're also pointing users to use specific columns for specific actions. For example, if you wanted to create a bar chart, don't use a text column for that, because how are you supposed to compare numbers with a bar chart, with text information? Okay, so this is a board. In the top left, you'll see a little drop-down menu. And this is where you can select other board views. So right now we're using the main table view. We're looking at this data as a table, up, down, left, right. There are a bunch of other views here, and each view is basically a client-side web app that uses this data to populate its view. Let's go ahead and open up the MUT attendance view. This is a chart view, so we call it a chart view, and it's exactly that. It's a chart, and this one shows us a pie chart of how many of the dogs actually attended our party. This particular view pulls the data from the board via our API. It makes an API call, gets that information, and then generates this view from that information. On the right side, you can also see a bunch of settings. These are settings that your app can also configure. So if you wanted to configure a dropdown to select which column is displayed in your chart, you could do that, values, and so on. Just to step back a little bit, the chart view was built before the Monday Apps framework. So technically, on the back end, it's not built as an app. But if you were to rebuild it using the apps framework, you could. And that's kind of the beauty of the apps framework. You can build anything that is already a native feature, but build it yourself. I want to show you another view, and this is in the apps section. So this is an actual board that this is an actual view that was created using our apps framework, and it was created during a hackathon by our team just before COVID started, so that we could basically help people work from home more efficiently. This is called the pivot board widget, pivot board view, sorry. And what it lets you do is it lets you create a pivot table. So what I can do is I can create rows and columns, just like in a pivot table in Excel, if you're familiar with one of those. And let's go ahead and do this. So I can see how many dogs attended based on their breed. And I can see it's pretty spread out, but you can use this information to see you can see all sorts of information and kind of mix and match your reporting as needed. The reason I bring this particular app up is because we built it in 2 days using our apps framework. On the back end, this app is being rendered in an iframe. So it's inside a container that is on this board itself. And what it does when you open it up is it makes an API call to pull all that data, and then it uses a React library. I think it's called React-Pivot, but don't quote me on that. But it uses a React library to build this view. And then there's, of course, some CSS to make it look like Monday. And you can do all sorts of different stuff. What's really cool about this library is it lets you build charts using your pivot data, and you can do all sorts of cool stuff. But yeah, before the apps framework, we got a lot of requests for the pivot table. It was, we were like, okay, that's going to be super difficult. Then we developed the apps framework, and we could build this in 2 days, which I think is pretty cool. I think it's a testament to how easily you can build an app once you become familiar with the platform itself. So far, I've been showing you client-side apps that are connected to a single board or connected to a single table. You can also create dashboards which are connected to multiple tables. So let's go ahead and take the puppy party dashboard. All right, so the puppy party dashboard, I see I have to do some configuration, but it will show you a bunch of different widgets, which are all rendered inside iframes. And each widget pulls data from one board or multiple boards, and you can configure them around your dashboard so that you can create a single look that contains a ton of different reporting. Our apps framework lets you build individual widgets. So in the same way that you could build a board view that's connected to a single board, you can also create a widget connected to multiple boards. And our apps framework is set up in such a way that you could use the exact same code to build a board view as well as a dashboard. There are some differences, like of course you would have to create logic to parse out data from different boards. And some of the settings are different. Deb, I know you mentioned that, and we can talk about it in a little bit. But by and large, the APIs that are underlying these widgets and boards are exactly the same. All right, let me now go ahead and show you how you would build something like this. To do that, we're going to open up the Manage Your App section. To do that, click on your little avatar. It will be your face in your account. It will not be my face. And then click on the developer section. And this is where you can see all of the apps that are on your account. Each of these apps are apps that you are developing or a collaborator on, and you'll see a status of whether they're published or not. I'm going to go ahead and open up this app, my app for my webinar. And you'll see on the left side, there's a bunch of different options here. I just want to touch on a few. OAuth and permissions is where you can set the scopes of your app and also get the URLs for implementing OAuth, if that's something you want to do through authorization. And then the features is where you can actually add features. You can add those building blocks. So in this case, on the left, I've got a board view. And when I click on it, there's a bunch of different information in here. The view setup pane lets you test out your board using a custom URL. So if I go ahead and hit edit, I can select a iframe URL, and I can use that for local testing, and then I can preview it. And if you use our quick start guide, we will walk you through how to set up your local environment and how to use this to create a very simple board view. Remember those settings that I talked to you earlier about where you could like set up the pie chart and you could set up what columns it's connected to? You can do the exact same thing. And on the right side here, you can add fields and you can add whatever settings you want. For example, you can ask a user to select one column, multiple columns, a single group, that kind of thing. And finally, the build section. This is where you can manage your releases. As I said before, apps are rendered in an iframe, but you don't necessarily need to host that information, and that iframe doesn't necessarily need to pull in data from your server. If instead you wanted to upload your production code and have it hosted on our CDN, you could definitely do that as well. Just hit upload your production build as a zip, hit create build, and you'll be good to go. If you go into the features section, there's also a feature for dashboard widgets. It's exactly the same as the board view. The only difference is those settings and the fact that you can connect it to multiple boards. And finally, integrations. This is really in my opinion, one of the more exciting, most exciting things about our apps framework, the fact that you can build custom integration recipes. Every single integration has a bunch of different recipes that you can use on your boards. And recipes define the trigger and action. Instead of using this particular app, I'm going to go ahead and open up a different one that has more recipes. All right, and these are some examples of recipes. Each recipe is a card, and a user can click on it to configure it for their board. And as you can see, there are quite a few here. So on the top left, we've got when source column is updated, transform text to uppercase, and then update target column. This is the integration recipe you'll create if you're using our quick start guide. We've got a bunch of other ones. When an issue is created in Jira, create a new item on a board. When a new project is created, set the due date for a specific column to today. This is a Monday to Monday integration. So basically when something new is created on one board, you can set a due date on a different board. Let's go ahead and open up when source column is updated so that I can walk you through how to set up recipes. Now this is that server-to-server communication that some of you have been talking about. So there are two sections to every recipe. There's a trigger and there's an action. The trigger is It's exactly what it sounds like. What needs to happen for this recipe to be invoked? In this case, the trigger is when a column changes. So what you can do is you can specify a specific column on a specific board, and when that column is updated, the trigger will be invoked. When I click on this trigger, you can actually select a bunch of other ones. You'll see that I've got a Monday logo here. This means that this is one of our inbuilt triggers. Remember how earlier I was saying that our apps framework handles a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to building integrations? This is one of those examples. If you're building an integration using just 2 APIs and nothing else, it gets really difficult because you have to set up webhooks or you have to pull the information in order to get the relevant data, and then your app has to then parse that out and then actually do something. And there's a lot of plumbing involved, if you will, right? You have to connect your pipes into various different places in order to make something happen. We take a lot of that plumbing away from you having to implement it. With these inbuilt triggers, all you have to do is select whatever trigger you want. So when a specific status changes, remember that little drop down? When that changes, it'll then invoke the trigger. You don't have to worry about implementing polling for that particular status column. It'll just work. And then all you need to do for this specific trigger is you need to implement a sentence. So basically what is it gonna say in the recipe when a status changes? You'll see I'm doing this little thing in the braces. In the braces, the first piece of information is the label. So you'll see right here, it says status. And the second one is the key, which corresponds to the column ID here. And then I can select where does the board ID come from? It's going to come from the context. That is where this particular integration lives. The column ID is going to be from the recipe sentence, i.e. from this particular field that is configurable by the user. And you're good to go. I just implemented a trigger for my recipe without having to set up a listener, without having to pull for data from our API. Don't have to worry about any of that. We will handle all of that. Of course, if you wanted to create your own custom trigger and you did want to pull our API, or if you wanted to pull someone else's API, like an external tool, you could also do that. You'll see right here, there's a custom trigger option. And when you click that, you can implement your trigger. Essentially, it's a subscribe unsubscribe protocol. So we will send you a webhook URL, and then your server will have to ping us. I can talk more about this if folks are interested, but I'm going to breeze through it for now. After the trigger, there's also an action. This is the actual thing that's going to happen when the trigger is invoked. Essentially, what happens is the trigger will take some output data and will pass it to the action. And then the action will have that as input fields. And it will take this data and do something. In this case, it's a text transformer. So it takes text from the previous trigger and it makes it uppercase and it posts it to a target column. But your action can do whatever you want. When I hit replace, you'll see that this icon is an app icon. This means that it's a custom action that I implemented. But just like before, you can also use one of our inbuilt actions. What this means is you don't, again, have to worry about posting to our API in order to set a specific date. You can just configure that in the UI. And you don't really have to worry about a lot of that low level implementation unless you want to do something very specific. What this also means is you can set up a purely UI app, like an app where you don't have to build anything, a no code app, by using an inbuilt trigger and an inbuilt action. So if I said when a status changes, notify somebody, boom, immediately I can just set this up, and I need to configure all of the fields. But once I do that, users will be able to use it, and I don't actually have to implement anything. If I did want to implement something for like the action step, for example, I could do that by setting up a server and having all of my app logic live on that server. That's all I'm going to talk about in terms of integrations for now. Those of you who have specific questions about integrations, views, widgets, what you can do about it, please put it in the chat. I think being able to speak to specific topics might be a little bit more useful than me just talking generally, especially because some of you are already intermediate or experts. I'm going to go back to my slides, and I have 2 more slides that I wanted to go through. Remember earlier I mentioned that our apps framework is pretty robust and deep. What this means is we've got a lot of different features, many of which you won't really see unless you do a deep dive into our documentation or actually build it yourself. So before you go into that and have to find all of those features, I'm going to go ahead and just tell you some of the useful ones. So for board views and dashboard widgets, these are those client-side SDK and apps framework pieces that you can put together. We've got seamless authentication. What this means is your client-side app can ping our API without having to worry about authentication, without having to worry about API tokens, because it's running in someone's board view, and we're just going to use that particular logged in user's session cookie for that. So you don't have to worry about API keys. We also have a monday.execute method in our JavaScript SDK. So if your client-side app wanted to set up a little alert, like a little banner in green saying that your app was successful, or a red alert or something like that, you could do that using the monday.execute method. Our SDK also exposes a storage API, which is instance level storage for views and widgets. So if you wanted to save your app's state to the storage API, you could do that. If you had other pieces of information that you wanted to store, you could store that in our storage API. You'll need to look up the exact amount of information you can store, but there's it's the key value pairs themselves. You can store a lot of information, and then overall storage is pretty high as well. So if you wanted to do some major databasing using our storage API, you could do that. We also have a design system. If you go to design.monday.com, you can see all of the tips and tricks and kind of our design philosophy so that you can make your app look like ours. As I said before, we do have that JavaScript module that you can use to use these special actions like monday.execute. You can use set up listeners using the SDK. And you can make API calls without having to worry about making HTTP requests. And then finally, we've got some example apps. We have a whole GitHub repository that you can use. A few of the example apps are quick starts. And then we have another one, which is a word cloud, which you can also use in your Monday account. For integrations, we've got custom actions and custom triggers, which I've talked to you about earlier. We also have custom fields. This will let you load up configuration from a remote endpoint. So let's say you want to, I don't know, so there's a specific drop-down menu for inventory. And today you have shoes and socks, and tomorrow you have shoes, socks, and a hat. You could just update your remote endpoint, and whenever anyone configures that particular field, they will get the real-time values from that endpoint. We also have OAuth support, which I mentioned earlier, so you can generate scope tokens. We have a server-side SDK, so that JavaScript module, you can also use it to simplify your OAuth flow, as well as make API queries without having to worry about structuring those HTTP requests. And this is something that is particularly interesting, and I don't think it's something that folks often think about, but every single request is signed. So any request that's coming from our monday.com server has a JWT token in it, so you can use it to verify if it's legitimate or not. Our quick start guide has some middleware to do this automatically. So go ahead and use that whenever you're building any integrations. Yeah, that is all I have in terms of the scripted part of my webinar. I am now going to open up the chat and Q&A and see what I've missed. Okay, so in the chat, I see there are a few questions. I'll get to that after the Q&A, and I'm just gonna go through these one by one since we don't have that many. We have, I think, 9 questions in total, and I'll be sure to be done by the end of the hour. And of course, if you have any follow-up questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A, and I'll grab them as well. Okay, so Boss is asking, oh, this is a really good question. I'm going to answer this live. So when you're building a custom trigger and you are posting something back to the platform, there's an authorization flow that you have to go through. And so he wants an example. Let me walk you through that. And boss, if you don't mind, I'm going to make it a little bit more general for those folks who don't know what a custom trigger is or have not implemented one. So I'm going to go into just like a generic app, and I'm going to create a new custom trigger. Now, remember that a custom, so a trigger is, it invokes a particular recipe, right? So you would use the trigger if you are watching monday.com to do something, when a status changes, do something, or if you're using a different platform. So let's say a new lead is created in your CRM, you want to do something in monday.com. What our server expects is for your server to send us to ping a specific webhook URL when you want us to invoke that trigger and that recipe. When you start off, so when someone creates an integration on a particular board, what we will do is we will send the webhook URL that is assigned to that particular integration recipe on that particular board, and we'll send that URL to your subscribe URL. So we'll basically subscribe your server to that recipe. And then, of course, when someone unsubscribes, we'll send that information to your unsubscribe URL as well. Once your app is subscribed to a particular recipe and a particular webhook URL, your app can then invoke that trigger or can invoke the entire recipe by sending a post request to the webhook URL. Now, we want to check if those requests are valid and actually come from your app. And so we do expect an authorization header. Our documentation contains this, and I'm going to quickly open up our documentation so that I can show you the section and I can explain where that header should live. So on the left side, oh, I pressed this, nope, okay. On the left, there's a custom triggers example. And if you scroll down, calling your action will walk you through what that request to your webhook URL should look like. And you'll notice that we mentioned that your request should include the app's signing secret in the authorization header. Let me walk you through what that looks like. So for every single app, in the basic information page, you have a signing secret. And this is where you can verify requests that are sent to your app are legitimate and that we use to verify your requests. So you would copy this and you would put it in the headers of your request. And the headers on the left side, it would include authorization as the key, and the value would be the actual signing secret. When you make a request to our API, you have to do the same thing, only your authorization header is your API token. You're essentially doing the same thing, only instead of using the API token, you're using the signing secret. Boss, let me know if that answers your question. Okay. Deb has a question about getting the group setting for the board views. Okay, there are 2 screenshots here. Let me see if I can open these up. Aha, yes. Okay. This is something that we talked about earlier, that the board views only have a group dropdown, but the widgets have multiple groups. So let me go ahead and show that to you in the app section as well, for those of you who aren't familiar with the UI. My app for my webinar. So in my features, I've got a board view, and in the settings section, I've got to move all of these windows, sorry. I'm going to add fields, and right here you have a group field. Now this field will let you select a single group on your board. And the reason it's there is so that you can select, it's because it's only connected to a single board. Now, when it comes to widgets, which are connected to multiple boards, that field looks a little bit different. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a new widget. You'll see we've got this cool wizard for that. Let's go, basic information, my widget. Next, go to editor. Okay, so in your widget setup, add fields, you'll see that there is a groups, and this will let you select multiple different groups. The reason it's groups here, but only group on the other one, is because your widget needs to connect to multiple boards, and each board could have different groups, and so you allow the user to select those groups. Deb, it also sounds like, to me like you have some feedback and you want to be able to have this setting where you can select multiple groups in your board view. You would have to create a workaround for that because you can only select a single group. But let me think about what you could do. Let's go back to the views and let's think through this together. Let's look at the settings that you have and let's see if there's a setting that you can use instead. Now this particular group will only let you select a single group and you want them to be able to select multiple. You could use the dropdown. The thing about dropdown is that you do need to hard code those options. You could potentially, and I don't love the user experience here, but you could potentially make your dropdowns be top group, second group, third group, and so on. Here. And so on. And while that would at least give your users a way to select multiple groups, it's not the best UI. Either way, what I'm going to do is send this along to our team because I think it would be really cool to either have groups or be able to dynamically populate a dropdown. But I think that's your only option right now. I hope that answers your question, Deb. Okay. Lior is asking if a Monday user connects his Google account, can you use their authorization key? You can indeed. Something that I skimmed through is the authorization flow for integrations. Let me go ahead and open up the integration and I'll show you. So right here, you can enable an authorization URL. And this is an endpoint that we will send users to whenever they try and create a recipe from your integration. And essentially, this is your app's one-stop shop for handling authorization. This could be a URL like myapp.com/authorize. And when a user gets there, you would then check if you already have an API key for them for monday.com. If you don't, you can then send them through the Monday OAuth flow. You can also send them through the Google OAuth flow and then use that key by saving it to your database and whatever other flows you want them to go through. So it is possible to use the Monday users auth keys from Google or from any other platform. Now, I'm rereading your question, and you might also be asking if the user connects their Google account via Google login, if you can use their auth keys. The answer to that is no. And the reason it's a privacy issue. We want to show the user what your app is authorized to do. And so I would recommend just making them go through that entire flow explicitly. Okay, Boss is asking, when will the integrations section in the feature stop being beta? So yes, right now the integrations are listed as beta. I believe, I mean, they'll definitely be generally available when the apps framework comes out, but right now the beta just means we're still working on it. It doesn't necessarily mean that your users can't use it. So if you create an app that has an integration, you can share it with any user and they'll be able to use it. They don't need to just specifically enable integrations or anything like that. All of that is already available. So it's one of these betas that is available to everybody, if that makes sense. Okay, Deb is asking, can integrations combine multiple triggers into one combined action? Um, the answer is yes and no. So I would love for you to tell me more about the use case here. But overall, when you create a recipe, there's only one specific trigger that you can configure in the UI. However, if you use a custom trigger, you could implement whatever logic you want on your side. So if you want to create just the simple logic of when a lead is created in my CRM, do something in Monday, you could do that. Or if you wanted to set up a more complicated logic like when a lead is created in my CRM and that lead also matches one of my contacts in Salesforce, then create an item, you can add that logic to your custom trigger and it would happen. And then you would pass that information over to the action and the action would combine that information in the way that you want it to. Um, and you could do that by combining that information on the trigger side or creating a custom action that takes multiple pieces of information and does one specific thing to it. I think you posted in the chat. Let me go ahead and see. Yes, so when a user selects multiple items, we want to create an item on another board and do some text transformation. Yeah, you can set that up in a couple of different ways. So you could set it up as an integration with a trigger, like a custom trigger that watches for multiple items. You could also do it in your view because Deb, if I remember correctly from our conversations, you're building a client-side view or widget. And you could definitely do that as well. So if a user in your view clicks 3 or 4 different items and hits go, your view can do that calculation, do that transformation, and then post it to the other board. This is definitely possible. Okay, I am looking through some of the other ones. Jorge is asking, so he wants to create a widget showing all tickets from Jira that a user has assigned. You can do this in a couple of different ways. So you can create a widget, which is that client-side app, and you can use the OAuth flow from that Atlassian has to get an API token from their side and populate that view. You could also, if you wanted to, create an integration that says when I am assigned to a particular Jira ticket, create an item in monday.com. That way the board view would be synced up with Jira and you wouldn't have to worry about creating a separate view for that. It would just exist in monday.com and then the user could use that data in various ways, such as connecting it to a dashboard, using it in a view, and really just leveraging the tools that we already have in Monday for that. Jorge asked the same question about triggers and the API in beta. Again, this is, I don't have a specific date on when custom triggers and storage API will not be in beta, but I can tell you that it's available for everybody. So if you build using them, your feature is not going to be, it will be available to everybody in our team. Ooh, lots and lots more questions, and we have 7 minutes. Okay, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Jorge in the chat asked, does the authorization URL work for views and widgets? No, you would have to implement that yourself if you're doing it in a view or a widget. The authorization URL is only for integrations. Lior asks, are Monday apps always free? And the answer is not necessarily. Lior, you can control how you monetize your app. Just for a little bit of background, our marketplace is coming out later this year. And when we release it, there will not be a specific monetization option embedded into monday.com. That said, you can always monetize your app in your own way. So if you wanted to only give a user access to your app if they pay you, and if you have their account name or account ID on file, you could set that up and basically just prevent your app from working unless they go through a specific payment flow. There are actually a few folks on this call who have already implemented this. So if you have any questions about that, I would recommend post on the community. ask a general question and folks can help. All right. Deb is asking if the SDK handles the JWT token verification. It depends. I think I'm not 100% sure what you're referring to, Deb, but I will say that our quick start guide, if you're building integrations, our quick start guide already has middleware in there that will verify that token. So you don't have to worry about that from an integration perspective. From a view and widget perspective, our SDK basically abstracts out all of the JWT tokens and API calls and stuff like that. So all you really have to do is make the API call using monday.api, and you can trust that that information is valid, just because it's coming coming to your app through the SDK. So I guess the answer is yes. Although technically we're not using JWT tokens, we're using other tokens. Okay, Boss has a couple of questions about authorization types. Boss, we can take this offline. You can post on the community. But overall, I believe in Postman, actually, we have just a few questions left. I'm going to quickly go through this. So in Postman, if you're using Postman to test the API, to test the authorization flow or anything else, let me just go ahead and show you how you would enable that, that header. Let's let it load. Maybe while it's loading, I can answer a different question. Deb, I see that you asked about a changelog for the design system. We don't have a changelog just yet, but I can pass that along as feedback, because I think it's definitely something that should be there. Okay, so here is a Postman window, and in the authorization section, if you want to put in the signing secret, you would click API token. The key would be authorization. Oh, authorization. There we go. And then you would add that to your header. And what this would do is it would create a header in here that says authorization. And then it would have that particular header. And oh, this is actually one that was hard coded. When you actually run the token, when you run the API call, the header will be added dynamically. Okay, Lior is asking, can you do a fast review on Google integration? Yes, so I can quickly show you a couple of the different Google integrations that we have. Right now, our integrations are specifically with Gmail. So if you go into our integration section, you'll see all of the native integrations that we have. We have Google Calendar and we have Gmail. Those are the two that we have so far. We don't right now have a Sheets integration, a Docs integration, or a Slides integration. So you can, if you wanted to build one, Lior, you definitely could. Deb is asking, is it on a roadmap to be able to render a modal from a board view? It's not on the roadmap right now. Like I don't have a specific date when we're planning on doing that. But as you've noticed, Deb, you've been working with us for a little while. We're building stuff all the time. And so even if it's not on the roadmap right now, it doesn't necessarily mean we can't put it in if we get a lot of requests for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that as feedback. And we also have a feedback section in our developers community. I would recommend posting in there so that other folks can upvote it as well. And we can see how many folks really want this feature. So in here, you've got the feature requests. It's API feature requests where you can get upvoted. And in the Building Monday app section, you can also post. So in this case, since it's a Monday app, post it in the Building Monday app section and be like, who else wants this? And I'm sure folks will jump on because I've seen that before with other requests. Okay, it is 5 o'clock, but I can stay on for a little bit longer to answer. I don't think we're going to get kicked off because we don't have another webinar right after this, so we can keep going. Deb is asking, is there a way to limit a specific API query to a specific time period, or do we have to get all the information and filter it ourselves? Deb, this really depends on the specific API query that you're making. If you want to limit, let's say, the items based on when they were created, you'd need to get all of the information and filter it out yourself. There isn't a way to do that. The only API query that you can use that allows you to limit the time period is the activity log. So if you wanted to get all of the activity log activity log events between a certain time period, you could do that. But for items and the other objects, you would need to do that filtering yourself. Boss just told me that y'all didn't see my Postman example. I apologize for that. Sorry, I wasn't looking at the chat at the time. I have to reshare and I'll show you what that looked like. Okay, so now I'm gonna share my entire desktop. Should be good to go. And let me open Postman. Okay, so this is what Postman looks like. In the authorization section, if you want to use an API key or any authorization, there are a bunch of different options. Go ahead and click the API key option. And then in the key, write authorization with a Z, capital A. And then the value, you would put whatever authorization key you're using. If you are posting to a webhook URL, then this value should be your signing secret from your app. And if it is like just a regular API request from a remote server, you would use your API token here. And then make sure that this is add to header. And then when I hit send, this is gonna give me some nonsense. But in the headers, you'll see the authorization header gets automatically generated when you actually make the request. So I hope that helps. Let me see the chat if there are any more questions. Okay. Okay, so I have one more question in the Q&A, and that's it. Lior is asking, what clients do you have from various industries, and what are the main use cases? Lior, I'm sorry to do this, but our platform is so flexible that we have clients from almost every single industry. We have folks who are in the marketing vertical, who are small agencies, large agencies using our platform. We have people who build airplane parts that use our platform. It's a really hard question to ask because our platform is really, really flexible and folks use it for all sorts of things. If you want to get specific use cases for your app and really align your app with what people in monday.com are using it for, there are a couple of different resources that I would recommend. First, as I mentioned before, go to support.monday.com, and there is a guides section that you can use for specific use cases. You can see we've got marketing, sales and CRM, project management, software development, all sorts of guides here. And you can use these to understand how marketing teams use monday.com for, let's say, their social media marketing, how sales teams use monday.com as a CRM, and so on. I think this is a great place to go. Every time I want to recommend a use case to a client, this is where I go. Another place that is really helpful is stories.monday.com. Stories.monday.com is an initiative that we came up with where we want to share specific use cases from real users and share their boards with you. So we have a ton of different categories. Let's say the design and creative team right here. When you click on this category, I can see Ryan's template. And when I click on this, I'll get a little understanding of what Ryan does. And then I'll see his exact board, and I can use it as a template as well. So if you're looking for specific use cases, I would really recommend going to these two places, the support center, the help center, well as stories.monday.com. And you can use that to get an understanding of what our clients are doing. And of course, if it's showing up in stories or in our help center, it means that enough people are using it in that way for us to build an article for it. So I hope that helps. I know that it was a little bit of a flaky answer, but I hope it helps. Someone else is asking, how many languages does monday.com officially support? To be honest, I do not know that off the top of my head, but I can find out. So if you go to my profile, in the top right, you can select various languages. And right now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, around 10. So we have 10 languages that monday.com is localized for. And what this means is everything in our platform is translated into these particular languages. As we are building more and more features, we're localizing in even more ways. And so it's 10 right now, but it could be even more in the future. And that's, sorry, I don't know your name, you're anonymous, but they're also asking, can we access the language setting via the API? At the moment, no. So if you go to the API documentation, it would be in the user's profile. And this changes from user to user. There's no way to access it right now, but it's a request that I've seen before. And I'll go ahead and add that as feedback as well. I'm getting a lot of feedback from this particular webinar, which is super great. If you wanted to access any other kind of data from the user's profile, there is a query for that. So you can go to the query, you can go to the user, and then in the user object, you can select all sorts of stuff. So while there isn't a language, you can use the location if you wanted to, or the country code as a proxy for their language. And of course, you could always just ask them to select their language in your board view or widget. I hope that helps. Alrighty, Deb has one lingering question. Are dedicated form view features coming? Deb, yes, they are. I think a lot of people have been asking this question. Folks who've been using monday.com for a while, they're asking, hey, I know Monday Apps is super exciting, but are you going to continue to support and build on the features that you already have in monday.com? And the answer is yes. There are a few additions to the form view that are coming up. And so you don't necessarily always need to use a board view for that. We are improving that particular feature. You may have noticed that our chart view has been getting pretty cool in the last couple of months as well. We've been adding a ton of features to the chart view. And yes, form view features are coming up. There's a ton of other features as well. Deb, I don't know if you have signed up for our roadmap, but if you send us an email, we can put you through a process to give you a roadmap of features that are coming out as well. And that's for anyone on this call. Deb, I also see that there are, I think your team has joined and everyone is using your name, but there are 3 Debs on this call. So I apologize if I've called you Deb, but it's actually someone else. All right. So it's 5:10 here in New York. Thank you everyone for joining and for staying until the end. I really, really appreciate it. I hope that this was really helpful for you and that it answered all of your questions. If you have more questions as you're building out Monday Apps, we are having this every week. It is at different times so that we can accommodate for different time zones. So go ahead and pick one that suits your time zone. And of course, if you have questions, this is not the only place you can go. Go to the community. As I said before, it's a really, really great place to get answers from all of the amazing people who are building on Monday Apps, including a lot of folks who are on this call right now. So thanks a lot, and have a great rest of your day. Have a great rest of your week. Have a good weekend, and I'll talk to y'all later. Thank you.